Once upon a time, a stunning technological innovation propelled sweeping changes in every dimension of society. This new technology gave widespread access to information, incredible amounts of information, and suddenly barriers of class and other social locations to the great storehouses of human knowledge were significantly lowered. The gatekeepers of authority found themselves adrift in a chaotic new world. Because when the printing press was invented and the Bible was printed for the first time in mass quantities, translated into many languages, a cascade of religious and cultural transformations ensued. The epistemological crisis of the Reformation, the question of how we know what we know and where the legitimate sources of authority in society lie, is probably the best analogy to the epistemological crisis that we are living through today. It's similar because those traditional sources of authority in our old consensus epistemology have been toppled by this technological revolution. Like the Reformation, when the authority of the priests with the sacred text, shrouded in the mystery of Latin, transformed into widespread availability of the sacred text in the vernacular of the people, led to Luther's idea of sola scriptura, that the only authority was not in the priest but in the scripture itself. Then moved from the ultimate knowledge going to the rationalism of the Enlightenment, to the critical scholarship interpreting the Bible as a human text, into new insights of human cultural sources of its origin, eventually to secularism as a more organized consensus of authority, of the authority of where knowledge comes from. And then in this pluralistic society that we were all born into, these multiplicity of ways of seeing ultimate truth, even then, maybe up until 30 years ago or so, we had what I would name that consensus epistemology. It's the thing that we summon up when we talk about, nostalgically, Walter Cronkite, and the sense that there was, even if it wasn't the whole truth, a common truth, a shared widespread trust in the evening news, in the people who delivered it, that their reality more or less matched ours. But over the last 30 years, through the tools of the internet age, the gatekeepers have been toppled. Anyone who wants to spread an opinion to the masses, anyone who can be shiny or scary or enraging enough to get our attention can. Like the removal of the priestly intermediaries between the individual and God, the established epistemological authorities are toppled. And I do think there's a lot of good here, because that epistemological consensus, it was exclusive and colonial. Those trusted anchors were not the representatives of a pluralistic society, but the avatars of the dominant white Christian culture, right? Good riddance to the pretense of a monolithic normal the center cannot hold. But what is it that is then required of us who have to live our small lives in this big moment? What is required of us who live through this transformation? Because while there is some good in toppling that center, there is also danger. New priests always ready to step in and tell us how it is. I imagine many of us were a little alarmed and maybe even triggered by the Facebook Meta news this week, changing their rules, allowing feathers to get flown about willy-nilly. We had this vision when the internet was first emerging, you remember, of a democratization that was going to be this incredible place of democratic community and connection around the world. And that democratizing internet has transformed into what we are now seeing as the internet of the oligarchs. And while the free speech issues at hand are certainly complex, we should not be trusting Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk or the guy who popularized Ultimate Fighting Championships to be the arbiters of what is acceptable discourse in our public square. We know that. We know it is unacceptable, as Facebook now allows, to call women objects, to use hateful language against our transgender family members. We know this is unacceptable and heinous, and yet the structures that we live in have allowed these small cadre of people to use our public square for their own benefit. But it's hard to imagine any other way when we're all so overwhelmed, also inundated with the constant buzzing and beeping and more texts. And there are over 8 trillion texts sent worldwide a year. And that doesn't even count the other apps. WhatsApp, I think it's 100 billion messages on WhatsApp every day. I remember years ago, before any of WhatsApp was a thing, I remember complaining about the overflowing email inbox to a friend. And my friend, it was a friend from seminary, and he's a Christian, and so he had scriptural wisdom ready for just such a moment. He said, Ecclesiastes 12:12, but replace books with email. Now, if you're like me and you can't immediately call to mind what Ecclesiastes 12:12 says, here's what I found when I looked it up. Of making many emails, there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Not just makes us tired, but wearies the body that's made in the first story of that text out of earth and breath. The body that is the sacred starting place, wearied by all this information. Digital technology has made so many things easier, but it's also been one more step in the long road of promises of efficiency, which our economic structure has turned into creating more work for each of us. Right? As the technology has made tasks simpler and easier, we've worked more and more. In 1930, it was John Maynard Keynes estimated his grandkids would work just 15 hours a week. That would be the average. Because of all the technological development, machines taking care of most of the tasks. You might have seen the meme going around about AI this last year. AI, which created this image for us in a moment, and well, from what I understand, burned through at least a full water bottle of clean, good water doing so. The meme was this: you know what the biggest problem with pushing all things AI is? Wrong direction. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes. There was an article going around this week about the rabbi who's developed an AI bot to have a preaching companion. He began the sermon with his AI bot speaking as him, and then he had a whole conversation through the sermon. Again, I'm just thinking about all of the environmental impact, but I also think it's fascinating. I'm curious. I'm trying to play around a little bit with it. But I don't even know this environmental impact. If it said each prompt is the equivalent of a water bottle dumped on the ground, but I don't know, I just read that on the internet. Where is our epistemological authority? Because here's the dilemma. While our technological capacity for sending and receiving messages, for processing and moving information is limited only by the speed of our typing, or maybe not even that now, our speed of our talking, our physiological capacity for managing so much information has not kept pace or really changed much at all. But now we feel responsible for every message coming in, for way more productivity and information than is really good for us. For decades, psychologists and others have been warning about information overload. The stress, anxiety, overwhelm resulting in difficult decision-making created by a context in which we're trying to sort through more information than our systems can reasonably process. Information overload is the perfect context for the kind of propaganda tactics those in power are using to manipulate our attention, manipulate our outrage. Should we be thinking about the policies of the companies that are governing speech on social media and removing those prohibitions on comparing people to inanimate objects, to feces, to filth, based on their gender or sexuality? Or should we be talking about the possibility of militarily annexing Greenland or the Panama Canal? Where to put our attention, let alone what sense to make of it all? This is how the epistemological crisis becomes an individualized dilemma in the age of information overload. It turns out it's not new. This study, the people who study information overload, they go back and trace cultural concerns back through the 18th century philosophers who worried about the dramatic increase in book publishing, back to the 15th century invention of the printing press, back to the Roman philosopher Seneca the Elder, who said the abundance of books is a distraction, the abundance of those handwritten books. And finally, yes, to the earliest recorded fretting over information overload, Ecclesiastes 12:12. And as I drifted back through this history, I couldn't help but imagine books. They were worried about books. One coherent narrative doesn't ripple by the hour, by the minute with replies and comments and reaction emojis. Books feel like a tranquil, still refuge in the information overload of the internet-connected lifestyle. It was such a pleasure with a couple days off after Christmas to sit down and just read a novel front to cover to cover in just a couple days. So we've got a challenge in front of us. A challenge living in a culture that is so out of balance in its use of technology. And it means that we have a challenge as a community within that culture and as individuals in how we balance the use of technology in our lives. And one of the hallmarks of our religious tradition, of liberal religion, is that we generally embrace technological change. We embrace the changes that modernity brings. While many religious traditions resist the changing times, we tend to lean into them. I was so excited in 2009 to get my first iPhone. But I was struck by something I heard Kevin Kelly, who is a philosopher of technology, he said about the practices of Amish communities in regards to new technology. Kelly, he was the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog and Wired magazine. And this is from an interview he did with Krista Tippett in On Being. He's talking about the Amish who are seen as being anti-technological, but are actually, he said, just behind. They're just later than us. And the canonical vision of the Amish community, who don't have electricity, who do things without much technology, but in fact the story's more complicated. They're changing all the time. They're in the process of always evaluating technologies. And he said they're not actually that much different than most of us, because most of us are at the point where we can't use all the technologies. It's just too many. And so we make decisions, and from the outside, those decisions look kind of crazy, kind of irrational. So I have state-of-the-art internet, but we don't have a TV. That doesn't make any sense. And the Amish, they have no cars and no bicycles, but they'll have skateboards. They don't have zippers, but they have disposable diapers. You kind of look at it and you say, what's the strategy? What's the theory here, he says. So the theory is, very simply, that unlike most Americans who are individualistic in our decision-making about what technology we're going to use, I'm going to use email, but I'm not going to be on Facebook. The Amish are different in this way. They are collective decision-makers. And he says the criteria they use to decide are basically two things. One is, will this technology strengthen my family, increase my family? Because their ideal is they want to have every meal with their children until they leave home. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Will this technology strengthen my family? And the second one is similar, which is, does it strengthen the community? How much time does it bring them and keep them in the community? So that's the reason why they have horses instead of cars, because the horse can only go 15 miles. So they have to go shopping and go to church and go to visit all within 15 miles. And that forces them to pay attention and support their local neighborhood, their community. And so he says when they're looking at new technology, like LEDs or whatever, does it help them do that or does it not? So they're not rejecting technology, they're saying we want technology that serves our purposes. And the way they do that is interesting. They have Amish early adopters. So somebody might be interested in having a cell phone in their truck for work, and they go to the bishop, and the bishop says, okay, Ivan, you can use the cell phone, and we'll see. So next year, over the course of the year, they watch. His community watches Ivan to see how that affects his family and his community and his work. And if they don't think it's all positive, then he has to give it up. So it's a... Is there a doctor in the room? So we have someone calling 911. There are people closest caring. Let's take your own deep breath, whatever you need to do to care for yourself as we hold our attention and care on this medical moment. Just going to invite us all to, if you know it, hum along with me, Spirit of Life, while we wait and see. Of fear and uncertainty, it's always good to take a deeper breath. So I'm going to invite us actually to take a breath together and let it out with a sigh. And in fact, that's as we skip to the end here of this piece of our service. That is the invitation to return to the body in moments of stress and overwhelm, when our minds are asked to do more than our bodies can keep up with, to bring our attention back in, to take that deeper breath. Let's do it one more time. Take it out and let it out with a big sigh. And to release that information that might have gotten too much. Information in our bodies about what's happening in this moment. Information that can come in so many forms that overwhelms our systems. We need to practice what one of my teachers would call exformation too, to release it and move it through a breath, through shaking it out, through shouting back at the news, through a long walk in the woods, whatever it is that helps your being move the information back out through your body, to practice exformation in a time of overwhelm, so that we can return to the safety, the spiritual wellness of this earth and breath that make our bodies. No matter how overwhelmed we get, no matter how scared or worried, how devastated or numb, how anxious or angry, our bodies keep holding the wisdom that we need to come back to life, to come back to this moment. Let the knowing that is deep in ourselves speak as we discern what is right to do with each moment, how we will use the tools of our age, how we will respond to someone in crisis. Let our breath help us to reach out with purpose, to return again and again to our connection down to the earth, to the sacred body whose knowing runs deeper than any of our individual thoughts or any of our tools can ever offer. Let us connect deeply with that source of life in this moment, this day, and in the days to come. May it be so, and amen.